okay? Thumbs up. Okay, good. Shoyo Roku, the Book of Equanimity, case 20. Jizo's not knowing is most intimate. The main case. Attention. Master Jizo asked Shōgen, "Where have you come from?" "I pilgrimage aimlessly," replied Shōgen. "What is the matter of your pilgrimage?" asked Jizo. "I don't know," replied Shōgen. "Not knowing is most intimate," remarked Jizo. At that, Shōgen experienced great enlightenment. Good evening. I hesitate a little bit. Usually when my salutation is with students, "Good evening, all you future corpses." I do that kind of tongue-in-cheek, but in many ways not so. It's used to continually drive home the point of our own impermanence. I've been a hospice chaplain for many years, and Susan Quinones is also with hospice. And I think the encouragement is to work on yourself, your own awakening now. Don't wait till you're on your deathbed. Dogen Zenji was the founder of the Japanese Soto Zen school. He lived 1200 to 1253. He was spurred on with his spiritual journey at a young age. His mother died when he was very young, and at her funeral, he watched the incense smoke rising and disappearing. And he was struck with the impermanence of life, of course, losing his mother as well. And of course, the Buddha, too, observing old age, sickness, and death, launched into his journey. May we all take heed. We have an evening verse that we chant every night. Let me respectfully remind you, life and death are of supreme importance. Time swiftly passes by and opportunity is lost. Each of us should strive to awaken. Awaken. Take heed. Do not squander your life. All that being said, thank you for the gift of your presence on this beautiful spring evening, and welcome to the Los Osos Hermitage. Glad you could be here. It's really great to see so many old Dharma friends. I sat with the White Heron Sangha over 20 years ago before my own journey took me to the Zen Center of Los Angeles. And I say old friends using that in both senses. Old friends in the Dharma for a long time, but many of us are maybe a little old in the tooth now as well. And by the way, many of you know Mujin Sunim from Switzerland. She's also spoken at the White Heron Sangha in the past, and I think done a workshop, and I'm in communication with her. She sends her best wishes from Switzerland. She's doing okay. We have a tradition at the Zen Center of Los Angeles and at the San Luis Obispo Zen Circle where we remember our Native American heritage at the beginning of all of our talks. In Los Angeles, it's the Tongva tribe. And of course, here in San Luis Obispo, we remember the Chumash, who walked these grounds for thousands of years before us. So join me in acknowledging and paying our deep respect and gratitude to the Chumash people, our forebears. I always like to pay tribute as well to our spiritual ancestors and teachers, and our blood relatives, both living and deceased, who have brought us all here together. And special tribute to all of those on the front lines of this pandemic and those who have passed away, those who are sick. I think it's of some note to that the Chumash population was eventually decimated, largely due to the introduction of European diseases, kind of their own pandemic or their own epidemic. So I started with a koan from the Book of Equanimity, or the Shoyoroku. And normally in our Dharma talks, when we start with a koan as a topic, we explore the particular koan in depth, really unpacking it. But this evening, I want to present more of a kind of a broader overview of this upaya, the skillful means that we call these koans, and my own experience with them. And hopefully this will connect with Carol's talk last week about Stephen and Martine Batchelor's What is This? So those of you that don't know me, I'm a Zen Buddhist priest and one of the 5 teachers out of the Zen Center of Los Angeles. And I have had a sitting group up here. We fortunately get to sit at Mary Bernard's the Crow's End, and then our Sunday program before the pandemic hit was held at your spot in Avila Beach. So thank you very much for that. So what are these koans, these weird stories? The word koan is Japanese and comes from the Chinese word gongan. And I've seen it also as Koans, K-U-N-G-A-N-S. And it literally means public records. Kun, public, an, records. They arose during the Tang Dynasty in China, roughly the 7th to 10th centuries. And usually these were spontaneous interactions between a teacher and a student, or between 2 Zen masters. Some may be actual events, but many of them are more legendary or mythical in nature. And it was a very male-dominated lineage, but that said, let me tell you that the women who do show up, they usually, when they have their exchanges, they often end up chewing up and spitting out their male counterparts. They usually have the upper hand. Along those lines, a book written just a few years ago, or compiled, was the Hidden Lamp. I don't know if any of you have seen that. It's stories from 25 centuries of awakened women. So these koans, later in the Song Dynasty, these stories were compiled into various collections. And koans are closely associated with the Rinzai school. The Soto school, Dogen's school, more known for shikantaza, or just sitting. And yet, Dogen had his own collection of 300 koans. John Daido Loori, who also came out of the Zen Center of Los Angeles and started a monastery in upstate New York. That many of you know Corey with your group has spent some time there. But he wrote, because Dogen was an outspoken critic of koan study, some people insist that he would never have collected or used koans. What seems closer to the truth is that he opposed the superficial treatment of koans, not koan introspection itself. And of course, legend has it that before he left China to go back to Japan, the night before, he stayed up all night and copied the Blue Cliff record. Now, those of you that know the Blue Cliff record, it's pretty voluminous. So maybe that's more legend than reality. But Dogen used more than 580 koans in his writings. In the Shobogenzo, the Treasury of the True Dharma Eye, he elaborates on 55 koans, quoting them in their entirety. And it refers to some of them more than 280 times. So, okay, there's a little history. But what's their purpose? In my experience, they take the rational, intellectual thinking mind and run it into a brick wall. You don't intellectualize your way through them. It's very experiential, intuitive. Two of my teachers said the koans demand that we forge into ways of seeing and responding that have nothing to do with analysis or even reflection, and everything to do with spontaneity, playfulness, imagination, patience, and most important, a radical acceptance of life as it is. Hakuin Zenji, and he was lived at the late 1600s and into the, I think, the mid 1700s. He wrote the famous koan, "What is the sound of one hand clapping?" He said, if you take up one koan and investigate it without ceasing, your thoughts will die and your ego demands will be destroyed. It's as though a vast abyss opened up in front of you with no place to put your hands and feet. You face death and your heart feels as though it were fire. Then suddenly you are one with the koan, and body and mind let go. This is known as seeing into one's own nature. He said you must push forward relentlessly, and with the help of this great concentration, you will penetrate without fail to the infinite source of your own nature. So in this traditional koan practice, you're giving a koan to work out your answer. And we often say you sit with it. There's no right answer. So we're told not to think about it, but experience it directly. So what do? Well, we think about it. I know I do. That's been my experience. And then as you're doing so, you repeatedly go back to the teacher and continually your answer gets rejected. You run your thinking mind into a wall. You come to a complete deadlock. And there's a poem that says, the tree withers and the leaves fall. Now, ironically, when my experience has been when I reach that point, and when I do these koans, oftentimes I've got 3 or 4 translations that I'm reading and studying over. I happen to love doing that, but that doesn't give you the right presentation. And so it's after doing that when, as I said, the mind gets run into the wall that suddenly you just give up, and guess what happens? Your presentation kind of bubbles to the surface, and it's like that aha moment. Oh yeah. And half the time, more than half the time, it's something that was so simple. So Yamada Kon is another modern day Zen master. And he's passed away now, but he was in modern times. And he has something that he talks about, this awakening experience using koans and having kensho. And it's, I refer to it with my students over and over again. And he says, imagine that there is a thick black wall of glass separating the room you are in from the adjoining room. Now, most people believe there is only this world of phenomena. And that's the where we live. That's our everyday life. Most people think that that's all there is. That means they're only aware of that pitch black glass. They're not aware that there's another world on the other side of the glass. But they read the Dharma teachings, records of the ancient worthies, they hear talks, teishos, and then they come to understand that there is another world on the other side of the glass. And in order to discover that world, they begin the fervent practice of their first koan, which is many times the koan mu. And I'll speak to that in a minute. So he says it's just as if you were drilling the glass. And then one day you manage to bore a hole through the other side and make a small hole. This corresponds to a kensho, an awakening. Now, there are almost no examples, he says, of knocking the glass completely out. He says that possibly the sixth patriarch blew the glass with his awakening, blew the glass out. So some might make a hole equal to the size of your little finger. Some make a hole the width of a tiny needle. But the fact that a hole has been made is the same. We then realize that there is truly another room on the other side. It's not just concepts, and it's the result of your actual experience. Then it's a matter of gradually enlarging the size of the hole. The only way to do this, he says, is to work on koans one after the other. The final step, of course, is to eliminate the glass completely. And this is known as the Great Enlightenment. But since you've been in the one room for so long, even though you have removed the glass, you're still not completely clear. You have no recourse but to continue sitting until you become used to that world with no glass whatsoever. And the realization is there was no glass from the very start. To believe there is such glass, he says, is delusion. You could refer to it as an illness. For that reason, Harada says it's not necessarily good to come to a hasty kensho. The best way is to become completely settled in your practice. Now, at the Zen Center Los Angeles, there are many streams that flow through. We have, of course, it's a Soto temple, a registered Soto temple, and that's Maizumi Roshi, founded in 1967. He came from Japan. And Bernie Glassman was his first Dharma heir, and they created the White Plum Sangha, which is the teachers, the Dharma heirs coming out of ZCLA. But Maizumi had Dharma transmission in both the Soto tradition and the Rinzai tradition. So he was studying koans with Yasutani Roshi. And Yasutani is kind of a controversial character in Japan, but he left the Soto shu, he left the Soto school because he was upset with what was going on. He didn't think the monks were sincere in their efforts, that they were too involved with superficially carrying out Buddhist ceremonies and not working on realizing their true self. So he left, started his own group, the Sanbo Kyodan. Maizumi Roshi also studied with Koryu Osaka, and Koryu was a lay Rinzai teacher, and he has a koan system as well. So we have this interesting blend at ZCLA of these two traditions, and it manifests in all sorts of different ways, even in like Kinhin, walking meditation. If you go to a strict, like San Francisco Zen Center, a strict Soto school, you'll see them do slow Kinhin. You go to a Rinzai monastery, they're moving quite fast. Sometimes they're almost running. So we do a combination. We walk slow for a few minutes, and then for the rest of the Kinhin period, we walk faster. So it's just some subtle things. Even the way we sit. In the Soto tradition, they tend to face the wall, as Bodhidharma did in his 9 years of wall gazing before he had his great awakening by the Shaolin Temple. And then you go to a Rinzai, in a Rinzai monastery, they usually face out. Well, for years, we faced out the first period of every day and the last period. And every other period, we were facing the wall. Now, Roshi Gyoku, who is the abbot emeritus down there, she was the abbot for years and years, has an emphasis on collective awakening. So not just worrying about our own awakening, but a collective awakening. So she actually has us facing out every period. But that's just some of the subtleties of all these streams that are running through the Zen Center of Los Angeles. Another stream is with Bernie Glassman, the Zen Peacemakers. And as you probably know, he has been working with the three tenets: not knowing, bearing witness, taking action. And there, once again, is that not knowing from the earlier koan. So this not knowing is letting go of fixed ideas about yourself, others, and the universe. So the not knowing trains you to continually set aside fixed points of view. Bernie described not knowing as a flash of openness or a sudden shift to being present in the moment. And there's other interesting stories, well known. For example, Bodhidharma's encounter with Emperor Wu, where Emperor Wu was a little miffed by some of Bodhidharma's earlier answers to Emperor Wu's questions. And of course, Bodhidharma, Emperor Wu, is saying, this is this great spiritual guy, but what's he telling me? And he asks him, so who is this standing before me? And Bodhidharma replies, I don't know. Michael Moran, who many of you know, went into CMC with me into the prison, worked with inmates there, and he had an exercise which was, I always found, was really interesting. The inmates would sit in a circle and he would go around each individual, just basically saying, so tell me about yourself. What do you do? Who are you? And of course, we would have the usual things about, well, I'm an inmate. Maybe I'm a father. I work in prison industries. I make boots. I'm a murderer. I'm a husband. I'm a father, whatever it might be. And we go around the circle. And then Michael said, now, I ask the same question, but you tell me, I don't know. And there is a very much an openness, a spaciousness there. So of course, Bernie Glassman also is involved with socially engaged Buddhism, and that's prompted many of us to, with our hospice work, our prison work, working with the homeless. Now, he also, by the way, Bernie brought some levity into this serious Zen stuff. He said, we're too serious in Zen. So he went out and actually found a clown, Mr. Yuhu Moshi Koan. He's a professional clown, and he has taught us clowning. So we all go around now carrying our red nose and having a lot of fun. So our koan system at ZCLA, we have 700 of them that we work through. And it starts with, usually with the koan mu. And once you penetrate mu, you go on to what we call the Dharmakaya Cones. There are 200 of those. And they're usually short, pithy statements. Most of them, or many of them, taken from the larger collections. But they're usually just one-liners, such as, how do you stop the sound of a temple bell? Or hide yourself in a pillar. Or how do you get out of a stone grave, which is locked from the outside? We then move on to the Gateless Gate. There are 48 cases there. The Blue Cliff Record, which I held up a little while ago, 100 cases there. The Book of Serenity, Shoyo Roku, another 100 there. And then the Record of Transmitting the Light, the Denko Roku. And this is like a spiritual genealogy, telling of the Enlightenment experiences from all the way back to Buddha, forward to Ehe Dogen and Koan Ejo. Next, we move to koan studies with the precepts, the ethical guidelines of Buddhism. And finally, Dongshan's 5 ranks. Now, it's been my honor and privilege and challenge to work on koans, to go through these 700 for the last 20 years with my root teacher, Roshi Gyoku Nikao. It's been hard work, sometimes frustrating, sometimes blissful, rewarding, but over and over, it's this idea of closing the gap between subject and object, between myself and what I'm facing. Genuine koan study is really only possible to work with a teacher who's also gone through these koans. And I'll share quickly some of the mechanics of this, because some of you I don't think have experienced this. Some I understand have. But in the monasteries and training temples, you meet the teacher face-to-face, one-on-one, in a personal interview. So we call this, in our lineage, we call it dokusan, when it's with a Roshi, or daisan, if the teacher is a mere sensei like me. So you're assigned the koan, and you continue coming back to the teacher to share your understanding of the koan. And sometimes this is over and over and over again. Zen teacher Ross Boliter said, the moon rises and is reflected in the water in its own good time. Meanwhile, you come up to the gate 1,000 times. When your time is right, under the cover of darkness, you go through. As I mentioned, one of the koans that you are usually going handed first is the koan mu. A monk asked Joshu, in all earnestness, has a dog Buddha nature or not? Joshu replied, mu. Well, the Chinese character for this means nothing, or non-being, or to have nothing. Therefore, if we take it literally, basically he's saying, no, a dog does not have Buddha nature. So how can that be? Shakyamuni Buddha told us that all sentient beings have Buddha nature. So you sit with that. Of course, if the truth be known, old Joshu, when asked this same question by another monk, he said, yes, a dog has Buddha nature. So I personally took 8 years to pass mu. During that time, I'll have to admit, I relied on Dogen's lines from his Fukan Zazenki, which is Principles of Seated Meditation, where he said, therefore, it does not matter whether one is very smart or very stupid. There is no distinction between those of sharp or dull faculties. I relied on that. I felt those 8 years at times stupid. And I take pride, or used to take pride on myself in terms of holding the record in ZCLA for taking the longest period of time to get through Mu. And then I was upstaged by one of my koan teachers, Roshi Ryodo, who said it took him 10 or 11 years to pass. So when you are with your teacher, you share your understanding or present your case, so to speak. If you pass, the teacher will say, go on to the next one, and rings a bell. If you don't pass, he still rings a bell, and off you go to continue to work on your koan. But what is the relevance of all this? Well, it's really about your life, my life, right here and right now. You take these dialogues, ancient though they are, and you become the koan, not centuries ago, but in your life right now. There's another Joshu koan. It goes, your student, a monk asked Joshu, your student has just entered the monastery. Please instruct me. Joshu said, did you finish your rice gruel? In other words, did you finish your breakfast? The monk replied, I have finished eating. Joshu remarked, then wash your bowls. So today, how does that connect? Today, you may be asked, going grocery shopping? Then wear your mask and keep 6 feet away from the other. The question may be dealing with a pandemic? Then wash your hands. A koan in Zen practice isn't about seeing the point, but realizing how to integrate its insight into your life. Well, if you haven't been convinced that these ancient riddles have meaning for you today, you're in luck. My teacher, Roshi Egyoku, and Roshi Eve Marco have just released a publication called The Book of Householder Koans, Waking Up in the Land of Attachments. Now, Roshi Eve is the widow of Bernie Glassman. And what they did was take current real-life situations submitted by their students and practitioners and from 4 different countries around the world. They're real-life stories. As they write in the introduction, they concern love, raising a family, and especially small children, relationships with friends and neighbors, the rush and bustle of work, connections between men and women, caregiving to those who are old and ill and preparing for death. I gave a talk using recently with our group, using one of the koans from that, and it was entitled Martin, the Suffering of the World. They had a little verse at the beginning that Eve and Roshi put in. I am a refugee. I am an orphan. I am a homeless child. The Buddha was right. Life is suffering. Who says I'm suffering? The koan, or the case, just one line. Martin asked, how do I stop the suffering of the world? So Martin, in this case, is a real person. He's still alive. He's a doctor. As the reflection said, the reflection on the koan, his patients wait in the anteroom from morning to night to see him, recite what ails them, and get treatment for their pain. Martin's also a Zen teacher. and remembers from a long time ago doing his koan work, a classic Zen koan, "Stop the sound of the distant temple bell." It was then, he says, that he became aware of his personal life koan, which was similar. How do I stop the suffering of the world? So many of us have koans in the same vein. How do I stop the crying of my son or my daughter? How do I stop my own suffering and pain? How do I stop the wars, the misery of refugees, the hunger of children, and the mass extinction of the species? Today I received 3 prayer requests. One from a Dharma sister. Her sister is dying from COVID-19 in New York, expected to pass within the next 2 days. Another friend just brought his wife home from the hospital. She tried to commit suicide. She's dealing with a very debilitating disease and some really intense pain. How do I stop being overwhelmed by a sense of powerlessness when I feel I can't stop any of these? Are you feeling powerless now? Overwhelmed? So this became a life koan for this Dr. Martin. And these natural koans refer to the question that arises naturally in our lives. And they can actually become the crux of our own spiritual inquiry and the source of our own awakening. Dogen Zenji calls this the koan realized in life. His own natural koan was, if we are already Buddha, why do we need to practice? What is your natural koan? The Buddha's was, why is there suffering in the world? Well, I loved Carol's talk last week using what is this? You know, in our tradition, when you're the head trainee for a year, at the beginning of your year of training, you get a fan and your teacher writes on it. And my teacher wrote, "See as is." More recently, for some of the new Shusos, the head trainees, she's written, "This is it." You know, all of the koans in the Book of Equanimity, one of the koans I shared early on, they all begin with the one word, attention. Perhaps this is enough. So, Harada Roshi, again, he had said the final goal of Zen practice is to become a human being in the true sense of the word. Along the way, we must, at some point, grasp our original self. Having once grasped it, however, we must put it away. It is only when we have, so to speak, pulverized the jewel of the black dragon that we become truly free. We also have a line that the Shiso does when we have Dharma combat, which is at the end of that training year. We have this ornate Shuso Hosen ceremony, and it involves this Dharma combat. They have a koan that they present to the Sangha, and the Sangha gets to drill them. Well, at the end of all that, the Shuso has a line, and I share it now. I hope there is enough water in the Pacific for you to rinse my words out from your ears. So, as my teacher recently said, stay safe, keep distance, wash hands, eat healthy, move, sleep well, laugh.
Well, thank you so much, Mark. That was so interesting. Um, I still didn't hear any answers, but what I wanted to just start off, we'll see, we'll have questions if you're willing to take some, but I wanted to ask um, what, well, one of the things that always kind of turned me off was what you mentioned was the sort of the male authority of it, the patriarchal authority of it, or even just some kind of authority, whether it's male or not, but telling me whether I have the right answer. And it seemed, I don't know, it just seemed like it maybe was capricious on the part of the teacher. So I wanted to ask you, what is the criteria, what are the criteria that a teacher would use to determine if the student's answer was acceptable?
Well, of course, that would be giving away all the secrets that the teachers have in order to test. They have test questions as well to really kind of probe your understanding. So they're checking questions to really get this out, to see if there is really a truly an understanding of the koan. I don't know if that makes sense. And by the way, my teacher is female, and in fact, most of the priests down at Zen Center of Los Angeles now are ladies, and so it's been a real difference to have the female energy that Roshi Gyoko has brought in. And that was in the aftermath of a lot of male energy, and the place imploded a couple times because of that.
Thank you.
It's somebody, again, that has gone through the same journey. And I trust my teacher implicitly as I went through this process. But as Carol did about
Bernie, Mark, I think, did we lose your audio? I think maybe we lost Mark's audio. Can you check that, Mark? Oh, well, let's, I don't know. Does anyone have any, well, maybe you can.
I think Mark's internet has frozen. So
Okay.
we'll give it a minute and it'll probably come back.
Okay, good. So maybe what we can do is, if anyone wants to just throw out some idea or thought or maybe a question, and maybe I know we have other Zen practitioners here with us this evening, and maybe they might have a response until Mark can come back in. So just unmute yourself. Yes. Oh, there he is. There he is. Mark, unmute yourself. Or I'll do it for you.
There we go.
Good, good. We lost you there.
That was dramatic. Yeah, your screen froze and then it just dropped.
Yeah, yours froze too. So I think there's a connection issue. So good. So having female teachers made a huge difference, you were saying.
I think so. Yeah, with the whole culture at the Zen Center. Yeah, quite a shift.
Mm-hmm. Can you talk a minute about the nature of that shift?
Well, it was kind of the emphasis was put, for example, on Precept Study. Historically, and this is, as I was mentioning in the series that we do, the precepts are at the very end of that study. And she has taken them to make sure that they are at the very beginning of study. So when somebody has jukai, for example, which means receiving the precepts, you have to go through a series of classes, I think 6 classes plus on the precepts to really study these things. And we review these every month. We have what's called a day of reflection, where we pick out one of those precepts, one of the guidelines, and study it for the day. We have atonement ceremonies every month, where we come together to be, as we say, at one with our transgressions, if you will, and move ourselves back into alignment with the precept. So it's a major emphasis. And furthermore, last year we've always had these guidelines for teachers and for the community, but Roshi has come up with the Tsongas Sutra, which is an amazing piece. Her introduction to that is, she doesn't pull any punches. She says, this is what we've experienced at the Zen Center. Here were all the conflicts that we ran into. Maizumi was an alcoholic, a womanizer. Things like this, of course, going on at San Francisco Zen Center, I think the Catholic Church. It's been kind of rampant, this issue with those in authority and this power concern. Anyway, this document, I don't know if I sent it to Susan Quinones or not. It is really worth checking out. There were some psychologists. I worked with the group that did this, that put this together, and there were some psychologists. So they go into, in the appendix, we have things talking about triangulation, all these kind of psychological things that people oftentimes aren't aware of, and we spell it out. Everybody has to read and sign off on this. The whole Sangha has, and any new member coming in. So I guess my point is that there is really an emphasis on this.
Okay, good. Anyone else, please just unmute yourself.
Mark.
Rosemary.
Rosemary,
Hi, Mark.
how are you?
I'm alive and well.
Good.
Could you send me a copy of that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. Okay.
Also, I wanted to say we're recording, the session is recorded, and that'll be available too. I think Zoom keeps it available for 1 month.
For 1 month, right.
So you can hear this talk again.
There's handsome James.
I've been lurking in the background.
I can see. Actually, you've been on my screen, the large screen, the whole time. I loved your story last week too about the orange with Shuang-san. That was just beautiful. I never met him. I know you interviewed him, but he was really good friends with Maizumi.
Was he?
And they did things together a lot. And there was some event where they were both together. And Maizumi got up, said a few things. And Roshi Ryodo, one of my koan teachers, that's one of the teachers at DCLA, he was there as well. So Shuang-san gets up. Total silence. Stands there with his shujo, that's that big staff over my left side. 2 minutes go by, nothing. Pretty soon somebody in the audience starts clapping. Pretty soon the whole audience is clapping. And then he raises his sujo and the place goes crazy. That was Shuang-san.
Quite a story.
Anybody else have any thoughts or questions? Now's your chance. Everything you want to know about koans. Well, almost everything.
Except the answer.
Yeah, except the answer.
Mark, this is Susan. I just wanted to say thank you. That was a wonderful talk on koans. And, yeah, just sort of the historical perspective. And then I love the references to the new books in the modern day koan, because I think that's what we're asking ourselves now is, one of the things we talked about earlier today was having a sense of foreboding and a sense of peace and wellness all at the same time. And that in itself is kind of a koan, because you live with this duality of what is right now.
Exactly.
So I thought that was lovely how you talked about that. I'm curious to look at that book by Eve.
Good, yeah, great. Like, I can't tell you how many really good stories. And we were with Roshi Gyoku. We helped edit it when she compiled her stories. We didn't work with Eve. The one on Martin, that's actually from one of Eve Marco's students. But we worked really closely with Roshi Gyoku as she developed this. And I can't tell you, some of the stories are so powerful. And you would really connect with them, Susan. One's another doctor that's a friend of mine, and anyway, it's a really good story that you'll really connect.
Okay. Well, any more thoughts? I guess.
Well, isn't it all of this is Arlene? Isn't it all about accepting and understanding the impermanence of everything and being open to whatever is happening right now without expectation and without aversion? So the koan practice will allow you to break through all that. Am I getting part of that? I have never done koan practice.
Yeah, that's what happens. Yeah, you're in the now, you're in the moment. And again, you don't intellectualize these things. It's very experiential, and that's it. You're going over and over again, bringing that yourself to this moment, right here, right now.
So the breakthrough can occur intellectually, not just experientially.
The breakthrough? No, I think my experience is that it's experiential. It's when you drop all that other crap. I'm not good enough to do this. I'm above this, whatever it might be. And you drop your opinions and judgments and all of that. And that's that not knowing mind. And then as Susan was saying, I'm sure many of you in your own practice have realized that through years of practice that, all of this, my students are sick of hearing this, but all of our lives just continue like this. If it's not a pandemic, it's going to be something else. Somebody's going to die, lose a job, whatever it might be. But the practice somehow in the midst of that allows us to go through with some equanimity.
Mark, is it acceptable just to respond with silence to the koan? Or the other thing is to say, that question, like for example, what that one about what does your face look like? What did your face look like before your parents were born, or something like that? I mean, that question doesn't compute. I mean, can you just say that question doesn't compute? Or that's probably too conceptual, I suppose. But
yeah, as Roshi would have told me was, Shōgen, get out of your head.
or just
But to answer your question though, absolutely, there are some koans where, like my presentation and those of others, have been sitting in silence.
Yeah.
There's a great, it's actually another koan, but there's a story of Manjushri. This goes on and on. And I think they're talking about emptiness. James, you probably remember this better than I do, but basically it's the Buddha saying, this is about Vimalakirti, who was a layperson, and he was supposed to take no prisoners at all. Everybody, all the bodhisattvas were fearful of him. So he's ill. And so Buddha says, hey, you guys need to go see him. Well, nobody wants to because they're afraid of being chewed up and spit out by Vimalakirti. So Manjushri is the one, and of course that's a legendary archetype of one of our bodhisattvas. The bodhisattva of wisdom is the one that's chosen to go through. And so they're talking about, I think it was the issue of emptiness. So Manjushri gives this beautiful, eloquent reply. And then he asked Vimalakirti, so what about you? Vimalakirti sat in silence.
Well, I think that's an excellent note to end on. So thank you so
Hi,
much.
Sylvia. I just saw Sylvia flash up.
She's here. Yeah, yeah.
Hi, wonderful talk. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome. It's always a joy to be here.
Yeah,
It's great to have your humor.
yeah, yeah. Well, wonderful.
Yes.
And so I'm really hoping that you'll come back and give us another talk. So we'll be in touch about that. Okay, thank you and good
And I
evening.
will send out the sutra.
Yes, yes, do.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark.
Everybody.
Take care.
Thank you. Be well, everybody.
Be
Thank
well.
you. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.